So without further ado, we are running a few minutes behind. I hope people will be able to stay a little bit longer due to some of the logistics issues we were having. Please try to hang in with us a little bit past. For in Chicago, it'll be 9:30. East Coast, it'll be 10:30. We're going to go a little bit longer. But if you aren't able to stay around, we are going to be recording this entire session. And again, that recording and slides will be made available. So don't worry about that. And without further ado, I am really delighted to have this webinar started and kicked off with our friend and colleague, Dr. Rachel Bagley from WHO, dialing in from Geneva. Rachel, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And next slide, please. I'm really pleased to be invited to this webinar. So thank you, Jim. And I'm really pleased that this is the choice agenda, because anything in prevention is about choice. And it's great that we now have another choice, long-acting injectable cabotegravir. And WHO released its guidelines on this last week. And this was based on the fact that the two large randomized controlled trials showed that cabotegravir was highly effective. And when in the trials, it was a choice between, not a choice, a random selection between cabotegravir and oral PrEP. And in these trials, cabotegravir had a nearly 80% relative risk reduction compared with oral PrEP. I think it's really important to emphasize that doesn't mean oral PrEP isn't highly effective. In the trials, as you can see from the little bar chart, people who took cab took it almost perfectly because they came every couple of months and had an injection. But people who took tablets home often didn't take these as regularly as the injections. And of course, if you don't take tablets, they're not going to work. So there were more infections in the TDF FTC arm. I just want a little note of caution that as we get data from after the trials in the unblinded phase, one does notice that there's a slight drop-off in adherence to the injectable cabotegravir, which really highlights the need to support people to remain on cab if they require it. Next slide. We did identify in our review some gaps, and I'll come on to these in detail, but really we have a lot of information from the two large trials, but we don't know how CAB is going to play out when it's offered in real world situations. And we lack some data on populations. We have very little information on drug resistance. And this is important because cabotegravir is very similar to the first line drug dolutegravir. The good news is we had very few seroconversions. So the drug resistance issue, although we need to keep an eye on it and monitor this very closely, it only occurred in a very few cases. And we also had limited data on breastfeeding and pregnancy. I'll come on to this in the next slide. Since, oops, the one before that. Whoops, I think you're going backwards. No, yeah. So since our guidelines were released last week at the International AIDS Conference in Canada, two really important pieces of information came out. One was that they analysed some further data from the trial amongst men who had sex with men and transgender women. And amongst transgender women, there were no drug interactions with gender-forming hormones. And this is a big issue in the transgender community. So it's safe and effective in transgender communities where hormones are taken. And the other piece of information that came up from the women's study from HPTN 084, again, showing that in the open label extension, in the unblinded phase, cabotegravir continued to be highly effective. And in the first phase of the trial, in the blinded phase, women were could only enter the trial if they took long-acting reversible contraceptives. So there are very few pregnancies. But in the unblinded phase, this requirement has lessened, and there are continuing to be pregnancies, and all data that we have from these is very reassuring that there are no problems. But we will have to again keep monitoring this. Next slide. Next. Well, another part of our review to support our recommendation on CAB was asking PrEP providers and about what they thought about giving PrEP, and we had a survey, nearly over 1,000 respondents. Only about 50% had heard of CAB, so a lot of work there to support knowledge for providers about PrEP. But those who had heard, more than 70% thought that this was going to be an exciting option, and very few thought that this would be something they wouldn't want to offer. We looked at a systematic review of values and preferences of people who were potential CAB users. And although this varied enormously over countries and between populations, in general, there was interest in CAB, and people, not surprisingly, thought that injectable prevention would be really helpful for people who didn't want or couldn't take a daily tablet, wanted more discretion, and those who were familiar with taking other types of injectables, such as long-acting contraception. We were really keen to work with the key population networks, with GATE, Impact, NSWP, and Input, and they carried out values and preferences work in their community. And again, this showed there was interest, but awareness varied enormously across regions and populations. And again, highlighting the need that we need to get communities involved, listen to communities, and see how they would like CAB in their prevention choices. Really critical was throughout all of the values and preferences work is that choice in prevention options is the key. Next slide. We looked at the cost effectiveness of CAB, and really it was a very mixed picture. But basically, the bottom line is, if CAB is relatively cheap along the lines of oral PrEP or slightly more, and is given to people who would benefit, i.e. those who are at substantial risk from HIV, it is cost effective. Next slide. One thing that we did really spend some time in our guidelines meeting and in subsequent follow-up meetings was to consider how HIV testing should be supported for people taking CAB. The drug company that makes CAB and the label and the FDA on their approval of CAB for use in the US stipulates that molecular testing is required before you start CAB and whilst you take CAB. And this would make it much more expensive, much more complex, and really unfeasible in many low-income countries. So again, we reviewed evidence and had virtual meetings with experts, and we have come to the consensus that we should be much less prescriptive on this and allow countries to make their choice, and that they have to weigh the balance of access to PrEP and feasibility with PrEP versus the very small potential risk of an earlier diagnosis of a seroconversion using molecular test. And so we support the use of the national testing strategy using serial antibody tests for starting on PrEP and monitoring whilst taking PrEP. And again, this is something that we are really pushing for implementation. So quickly, some delivery issues, oral lead-in with oral CAB. Luckily, that's no longer something that the company and FDA require. So that's, people can start immediately on injection. And stopping CAB and covering the tail, there've been, of course, as the CAB levels decline, the CAB is no longer effective at preventing HIV, but drug resistance doesn't seem to be something that is an issue in the tail period. That being said, we should continue to offer prevention choices, including condoms, PrEP, and switching to oral PrEP and the depivirine ring to cover the tail if people continue to have HIV risk. Next slide. Pregnancy and breastfeeding, although the data is very reassuring, there have still been very few pregnancies. So again, WHO is involved with other groups who are looking at ways that we can monitor adverse events in pregnancy and breastfeeding. But we recognize, particularly in East and Southern Africa, that pregnancy and breastfeeding is a period of heightened risk for women, and long-acting prevention could be something that women would really appreciate in this time. Similarly, for people under 18, although they weren't included in the trials, there are follow-up trials with this age group to see whether this is an acceptable and feasible option. And again, we don't have an age stipulation in our guidelines. We again think that this should be a risk-benefit analysis with the provider. Next slide. In the trials, selected people who gay men and other men who have sex with men and transgender women, but several groups that could benefit were really not prioritized for these trials, particularly sex workers and people who inject drugs. And so we really as WHO want to push for more implementation science, more understanding for how these communities would like to include long-acting PrEP in their programs. We also, really need to know how this will work in the real world, how people will choose CAB versus oral PrEP or the depivirine ring, how they will switch and swap between them safely. And we, as I said, we're very uncertain of the cost effectiveness, and we need more data on this, but that is going to be very much a measure of the price of cabotegravir and the price of delivering it, including the testing. Next slide. So my final slide is to say, what's WHO doing? We've released our guidelines, and as soon as we had our meeting with our guidelines review committee, we informed our pre-qualification department, and they immediately added CAB to their expression of interest, where the company can now apply for inclusion in the WHO pre-qualification list. And we are supporting countries with their regulatory process. Of course, at the moment, it's only had approval in the US, but the company is pursuing regulation in other countries, and we need to make sure that that happens as quickly and smoothly as possible. Following our recommendation, the Global Fund can now include CAB in its procurement, and countries can also think about how they might want to include CAB in their prevention programs. Because CAB has only been delivered in the randomized controlled trials, we're really pushing for countries as they implement to monitor and evaluate how their CAB programs go, looking at where they deliver, understanding how people will choose products, further safety on the pregnancy and breastfeeding, monitoring drug resistance in the seroconversions, and reviewing the testing approaches, and then supporting particularly those populations that weren't including in the trial. I know Mitchell Warren will speak more about this, but WHO is part of a group that is pressing for product availability and access. We're updating our implementation guidance on oral PrEP to include cabotegravir alongside the depivirine ring. And we're also updating guidance on PEP to PrEP and back again. We think this has been a very underutilized in the prevention portfolio as well. And so we hope that will help, particularly in supporting people who stop PrEP, who stop CAB and need to have some further HIV prevention in that tail period. My final slide is to say thank you, and I know that Michelle Rudolph is on the call today, and she has been absolutely central to this process. So thank you very much, and to my other WHO colleagues. It takes a huge team to do all the work behind our guidance, the reviewers, but really also civil society partners who give of their time to help us on understanding how communities would like PrEP to be delivered. So thank you very much, Jim, and thank you very much, everybody. I have rather raced through these slides, but all the details are on them, and you will have them, and our guidelines are on the web. And please do not hesitate to contact us on anything that is unclear. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was beautiful. And yes, all these will be available on our site as well as WHO. And Levi has been dropping a lot of links that you can see in this presentation in the chat, and we will be sharing that list of resources when we send out the recording and the slides. And because of time, I would like to just go ahead and move us to our next presenter, Mitchell Warren of AVAC. I'm going to ask you to come to the mic, go on camera, and please go ahead and get started.
Great. Jim, can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you all so very much. And Jim, thank you for organizing this. And the whole panel is a remarkable group, and delighted to be part of it, and delighted to follow Rachel always, and to collaborate with her and WHO, who've been just remarkable pioneers in guidelines. And as many of you may know, in Montreal last week, it was a flurry of guidelines from WHO, of which the injectable PrEP is just one, but really remarkable work from the whole team, really thinking about how we make choice possible. I'm going to very quickly describe an approach that Rachel alluded to in terms of a way in which we hope collectively we might actually accelerate the introduction of injectable PrEP, and what it's going to take to ensure equity, scale, and impact. Because we know full well, we didn't need a conference to remind us of this, that products don't end pandemics or prevent infections. It's the programs that deliver them with equity, with scale, and with impact that do. And that's what we all have to be focused on. You all know AVAC does a lot of tracking of the field. One thing I just want to highlight in this slide is that while a lot of this coalition that I'm going to describe is focused on injectable PrEP, and while this call is focused on injectable cabotegravir for PrEP, if we get this right as a global community, advocates, product developers, policymakers, funders, if we get introduction right, and certainly better than we did with oral PrEP, this is not just about one product. This is about the dapivirine vaginal ring. This is about creating the platforms for anything else that comes our way in this pipeline graphic and in the graphics to come. Obviously, we all know that while oral PrEP has been now 10 years since first approved in the US by the FDA, 12 years since we first knew it was safe and effective, that we have as a global community failed miserably in reaching the target. And while we just released data in Montreal that we're up to almost 2.8 million cumulative initiations on oral PrEP, that is far, far, far short of the original target of 3 million actual oral PrEP users by 2020. And now the guidelines and the targets are even higher. So we've got our work cut out for us. A number of organizations and partners have looked at the lessons of the last decade. This just very quickly summarizes what happened after we got that very first oral PrEP approval. And a remarkable number of projects began. 131 studies were launched in the first couple of years across 68 countries, 54 different organizations involved. And I think for many of us, what clearly came to be seen as many random acts of goodness. And many of you are on the line and you helped design and lead these projects. But many of them were projects that were too small and too slow in answering the critical questions to help decision makers, funders, governments, and users themselves be able to navigate through the information. And it was a very complex landscape, and it led to really interesting, important projects, but it didn't lead us to, again, these projects delivered with equity at scale and with impact. So how might we do it better together? An effort began about 4 years ago called the Biomedical Prevention Introduction Collaborative that brought together many, many stakeholders that began to look at newer products to say, how might we do this better? And it mapped key questions that decision makers would likely have in advance of the product even showing safety and efficacy. It began to plan in parallel with the clinical trials, not waiting for the clinical trials to finish. And it developed a shared strategy so that once we might see safety and efficacy of any new product, we could move in better designed, better timed, and better coordinated projects. And that introduction strategy is a hyperlink that's listed there if you're interested. And this was developed with the idea that injectable PrEP might show safety and efficacy by 2023. And lo and behold, we got those early results that Rachel described 2 years early in 2020 from both HPT and 083 and 084. So coming out of that, we released in June a new plan to accelerate access and introduction, and it begins with 5 guiding principles. Leading with equity, that we can't just do this in one population, in one geography. We've got to do it globally. We have to center communities and users. Again, coming out of oral PrEP lessons from a decade, many of those projects were not designed with the user in mind at the outset. The plan articulates how to move with multiple activities in parallel, not sequentially, so that, again, we go faster with scale and speed. It looks to impact, and it also recognizes that there's a lot we don't know and that we continually need to add to the evidence base as we go, but not let the absence of information stand in our way and prevent us from acting. The pathway to impact really looks across 5 key areas that go historically somewhat sequentially. We have product, we have regulatory approval and normative guidance, there's planning and budgeting, there's the development of delivery and supply chains, and then there's the focus on the individual user. And while those look sequential, again, this plan tries to reorient things so that those run in parallel. Very importantly, stakeholder engagement has to be the consistent pull through throughout this process, both from the years past in clinical research, but all the way through to program delivery. And the plan also outlines a research agenda that remains. Well, 083 and 084 were beautifully conducted studies with really remarkable data. They don't answer all questions. And so there is a research agenda that is continuing as part of this introduction plan, looking at alternate injection sites, looking at alternate dosing, so that, for example, if we could accrue data to show that perhaps cisgender women might be able to get injectable PrEP every 3 months instead of every 2 months, it might better align with Depo-Provera injectable contraception, so that a woman might be able to go to a single facility to get both products. That's a research agenda that continues even while we roll things out. And again, the full document is there. I'm not going to go through these next 2 slides in great detail, but I wanted to just give a sense of all the moving parts. You know, yes, there's a product, it's safe and effective. I did see a question in the chat. Right now, it is manufactured by ViiV Healthcare, the developer of the product, in a single facility in the UK. Clearly, one product from one manufacturer isn't enough. And very happily, last week in Montreal at the AIDS conference, ViiV and the Medicines Patent Pool did announce a voluntary license from ViiV to the MPP. And over the next 4 weeks, they're going to be reviewing generic manufacturing proposals so that onward licenses can be granted by the end of the year. Hugely important. When we wrote this report in June, we said these were the first 3 bullets. Happily, there's movement there. There's a process underway, but it's not enough, because clearly generic manufacturers will need capital investment to be able to manufacture. So there's a piece in the plan about making sure we see innovative financing for that investment into generic manufacturing. But at the same time, we're told it will take between 3 and 5 years for those generics to be able to manufacture this product. So another key part of the plan is the need to work with ViiV and donors to get the maximum volume that can come from ViiV's facility at the lowest possible price in that 3 to 5 year window, so that we're not waiting for generics. We need to build the market for generics when they come, because prices will go down even further when we see multiple generics competing for a market. But we've got to build that market. Similarly, the regulatory pathway, we know that there are a number of countries, 8 countries, in fact, that are reviewing dossiers. We hope that those countries might actually make decisions. They've been sitting on those applications now for over 8 months, and we still sit with only FDA approval. But we need ViiV to go faster and register in more countries. And then WHO, again, thanks to great leadership from Rachel and her team, there is a process now that is open for pre-qualification, which will expedite process. So those are all elements that need to happen. But of course, donors need not only to procure the product, they need to plan and budget for the program, not just the procurement. That needs to be happening right now with Global Fund, with PEPFAR, and with national government resources. At the same time, again, it's never just the product. We need to look at these implementation studies, and we do have an implementation study tracker at PrEP Watch, which you can see the current set of projects, but we need to see even more of those. Embedded in this is more and more training that is needed for health providers at all levels to begin to think about how we might deliver injectable PrEP. And we need to begin to think as a community about what it means to actually create innovative marketing campaigns, so that we are not only promoting injectable PrEP and dapivirine ring and oral PrEP, but that we are promoting choice. And then again, testing, huge issue. I did see, Catherine, your great point. WHO guidelines really are the opening process there. Obviously, what the regulators say with labeling of the product is going to be critical. Taken together, though, that's a huge factor of this work. And I mentioned research agenda is still to come to answer additional questions. And again, making sure civil society, many of you, over 200 now on the line, engaging in all of these processes. To pull all of that together, though, no one actor, no one agency can do all of this. So at AIDS 2022, a coalition to accelerate access to long-acting PrEP was announced. It is convened by UNITAID, WHO, UNAIDS, Global Fund, and PEPFAR, and AVAC is serving as the secretariat, building on the biopic agenda that we developed over the last 4 years. It's really looking at 4 priorities: build on the lessons of oral PrEP, coordinate the key stakeholders so that actually it's not random acts of goodness, but rather coordinated action, that we jointly develop strategies in the short term for both injectable CAB from ViiV, building on for generics and the dapivirine vaginal ring, and longer term, how it helps other products. Again, building a platform for the next generation of products and ensure that these long-acting products reach the market. The program, it's still forming, but the idea is that we have the convening group with AVAC as the secretariat, but there'll be 4 groups, 3 of which are looking across the prevention pipeline about demand forecasting, financing and procurement, demand creation and policy adoption. The second group there is very cabotegravir specific, and that is focused first on the product from ViiV and then on generics. But you can see in orange 3 ongoing processes that are separate but deeply related: the voluntary license agreement, the implementation science convenings that WHO and the biopic do, and multiple civil society engagements. And right now it's just beginning to form, but each of these working groups will be comprised not only of the key agencies listed there as the conveners of each of the groups, but representation from technical expertise, ministries of health, and civil society in all of these groups, because that is going to be an essential aspect of moving this work forward. Finally, it's never just a product, and as we navigate both the ring and injectable being introduced right now at the same time, thinking again about the trade-offs. And again, I will refer to the first of the choice agenda calls a couple of months ago. It's never just efficacy. Efficacy is just one of the many considerations to be balanced across this programmatically. And the coalition's really going to look at how we navigate not just about one product that may be effective, but how do we manage across all of these considerations? Again, just showing that it's not about the product alone, it's about the programs, the users at the center of it all. I think the to-do list is pretty clear. We've got a lot of work to do to translate safety and efficacy. We have a voluntary license now that'll go to generics. We have remarkable WHO guidelines that Rachel just presented. How do we take all of that together to make it real? And hopefully that's something that all of us can do collaboratively so we go faster together. And fundamentally, the key metric of success is to be in the next 3 to 5 years further than we've been in the last decade of oral PrEP. That's the challenge for all of us. And I'm going to thank many, many people involved in this program across the board and turn it back to you, Jim, and really look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Mitchell. That was fantastic. I'm going to invite people to continue asking questions and engaging in the chat. I'm gonna keep moving the program along. Hopefully we'll pick up some time and we can have time for verbal Q&A a little bit later. Can we, I would love to invite to the floor, Monica Gandhi.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Monica,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. I think you have to enable me to share my screen.
You should be able to share your screen.
When I try, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. But it's very nice to be with all of you as we're waiting to just get this enabled. And really looking for, I hope I'm not too redundant. I'll go over some of the data that Rachel and Mitchell have already, I see, I'm logged in twice, someone said. So let me log out of the errant place. And now I'm just logged in once. So hopefully I'll be able to share. It looks like I am. Thank you.
There you go. Thank you so much, Monica. And thanks, Michelle, for helping do the troubleshooting in the chat. Much appreciated.
Sorry about technical, yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit deeper into the data of the 2 trials that led to the approval of intramuscular cabotegravir, and maybe some differences in the guidelines in the US and WHO setting. So we all know that essentially oral ART has been approved since 2012, at least by the FDA. And these were all the pivotal studies that led to the approval of oral ART, starting from the IPREC study in 2011 and all the way up to some demonstration projects. Importantly, actually, remember the results of the FemPrep and the VOICE study, which were made much of, as they should, that there was no efficacy in those particular trials. And that really, at the end of the day, had to do with adherence. And so after looking at drug levels, it was just clear that that adherence is really the Achilles heel of oral PrEP. Taking a drug every day when you feel perfectly fine is actually more challenging. And this ended up showing its face, these adherence issues, in the setting of the clinical trials. And then in terms of where we are with oral PrEP adherence in the real world setting, this is a very nice systematic review that was just published in April in Lancet HIV. And it looked across the board at multiple studies, and actually 41% of those on oral PrEP discontinued within 6 months. And suboptimal adherence for those 59% who stayed on it was calculated at 37.7%. The discontinuation rate of oral PrEP was higher in this mass systematic review in sub-Saharan Africa than in other regions, almost up to 50%. And discontinuation rates were lower in studies with adherence interventions than in those without. Men who had sex with men and transgender women who were offered choice, for example, non-daily dosing options, had lower discontinuation rates than those offered daily dosing alone. And all of that data put together, let alone our clinical experience, has led us to this point in history where we really want other options besides oral daily PrEP for pre-exposure prophylaxis, and that's where we are now. Even when we were contemplating the finality of the results of these clinical trials of long-acting treatment and PrEP, the entire world and all clinicians were thinking of sort of a bimodal population who would want long-acting PrEP or ART. And I think it is people who are very highly adherent, but actually it's just tiring to keep on taking that oral ART or PrEP every day. I think that's a certain population that wants this product. And then the second, and this is the group that we have to reach the most, are people who have adherence challenges to taking daily oral ART or PrEP. It's that group that I think the implementation science projects now are going to focus on. It is that group that cannot benefit because of adherence challenges to oral daily ART, and what can we do creatively to get them on long-acting ART or PrEP. I will say as an aside that we at Ward 86, which is the clinic that I direct here at San Francisco General, we are piloting long-acting ART in virologically non-suppressed patients. This is not how the clinical trials studied cabotegravir and rilpivirine as a combination. They studied it in virologically suppressed patients, but we have many patients who simply cannot take oral ART. And we just published last week in Clinical Infectious Diseases showing very good success of our pilot program in using long-acting ART in traditionally very hard to reach populations, homeless, virologically non-suppressed. And it's these kind of implementation projects that are going to help us inform the field. So what about long-acting, not ART, but PrEP? What is the data? Well, we wrote a piece and we've already discussed, Mitchell and Rachel have already discussed that it's critically important to get long-acting injectables out, because at least here in the US, we have to increase PrEP. We are not close to our end the HIV epidemic goals. We all saw the UN AIDS report of where we are in the HIV pandemic as of July 2022. And I think the title alone, In Danger, really signals where we are. After 2 years of focus on the COVID pandemic, we have had setbacks in the HIV response. We need equitable access of long-acting cabotegravir across the US, and one step towards that equitable access is not only the World Health Organization's strong endorsement in their guidelines of July 28th, but also ViiV Healthcare and the Medicines Patent Pool signing this new voluntary licensing agreement. As Mitchell says, it's important to see that this really bears fruit in terms of low cost for low-income settings. So these are the two major clinical trials that Rachel already told us about. So I'll go through more quickly. But just remember these names. HBTN 083 was the study that looked at long-acting injectable CAB in men who have sex with men and transgender women. They were all over 18. They were all at risk for HIV. There was an oral lead-in phase, which luckily, thankfully, was dropped from any requirements or guidelines of taking cabotegravir orally, and then followed by cabotegravir long-acting 600 milligrams every 8 weeks compared to the gold standard at the time, which was TDF-FTC orally per day. And we all know the results by now, that essentially there was actually 66% reduced incidence above and beyond the reduced incidence of TDF-FTC in the IM cabotegravir arm in this patient population. The failures were rare. They were real, but they were rare actually. But the reason we say they're real is it's important to point out that failures in both the long-acting cabotegravir arm in HBTN 083 and in the FLAIR and ATLAS trial of long-acting treatment and prevention with cabotegravir and rilpivirine did show us resistance to the integrase inhibitor that's used, which is cabotegravir. That resistance is of concern because if you multiply by millions of people getting the agent, we have to be careful to try to do what's in our power to avoid resistance, because once you become resistant to cabotegravir, there are implications for first-line dolutegravir-based therapy to be effective in these settings. So again, of those incidents, HIV infections, which were clarified and expanded by a little bit in the unblinded phase of HBTN 083, there was some resistance, and there was actually failure even with on-time injections, speaking to the importance of drug levels, eventually, or at least some implementation science projects of drug levels to confirm that we're adequately dosing. because, by the way, a depot formulation kind of elutes out of the compartment over time. So plasma levels may not be a great indication of your overall drug level exposure. We may need more creative thoughts on how to indicate your overall drug exposure with a long-acting medication. HBTN 084, which as Rachel indicated, had updated data from the unblinded 1-year phase at IAS to 2022 in Montreal. The design was among cisgender women across a range of 7 countries, 18 to 45 years old. And in this patient population, cabotegravir even looked better than it did in the transgender women and MSM population in HBTN 083. Cabotegravir was quite vastly superior to daily TDF-FTC, probably because of adherence issues, as indicated by the preliminary drug level data. Actually, it was 89% more effective than daily oral TDF-FTC among women. And that data didn't actually change going 1 year out into the unblinded phase. And by the way, just a commentary, Tsamo Botswana cohort presented really final data at IAS 2022, showing absolutely no indication that dolutegravir has any neural tube defect concerns for women over 18. So cabotegravir as a related product should be used with impunity in that way. We talked a little bit prior in this meeting about the tail. I mean, what happens is that if you stop IM cabotegravir, again, it elutes from the depot compartment. It's injected right now into the lateral medial gluteal buttocks. Now, there was some data looking at International AIDS Conference in Montreal, looking at pharmacokinetics of injecting in the thigh, and the PK looked very good. So it may be actually easier to inject in the thigh than the lateral gluteal muscles. But at any rate, because the drug is sitting in this kind of deep depot intramuscular compartment, if you stop long-acting cabotegravir, it elutes slowly out of that compartment, actually over quite prolonged periods. In fact, over a year, you can see detectable cabotegravir among women. There's actually longer tail among cisgender women than there are among male participants. This was a study called the HBTN 077. So because of that tail, if there's ongoing risk factors for HIV infection, the patient really does need to be on oral TDF-FTC or among MSM or transgender women, intermittent TAF-FTC, another formulation of a pre-exposure prophylaxis agent, because being exposed to HIV and having lower and lower drug levels of cabotegravir is a setup for developing resistance. So in the real world, where we do think that on-time injections, that missed injections, that stopping may be more common than in the clinical trials, we have to be alert to this tail and alert to counseling our patients to please be on an alternative agent if cabotegravir is stopped. And then I'll end with the recommendations on how to test in the setting of intramuscular cabotegravir. You know, what we're doing at Ward 86 looks very much like the CDC guidelines, which, you know, you can see are quite intensive. The CDC guidelines actually say do HIV antigen antibody tests at every visit, but they actually recommend HIV RNA testing at every visit based on data. Every visit, by the way, is every 2 months. And this is based on data, again, from HBTN 083, that some of your seroconversions are missed because intramuscular cabotegravir will actually suppress HIV antibody seroconversion for a bit. PrEP does this, and some of those seroconversions were missed unless HIV RNA testing was done. But there is an irony here that you can see that by the CDC guidelines, patients who are on intramuscular cabotegravir are going to be getting HIV RNA testing 6 times a year. That's actually 3 times as common as those who are living with HIV on treatment. And that irony and that expense needs to be discussed, thought about in the context of sort of practicality and reality. And the WHO guidelines, as Rachel indicated, did not put HIV RNA testing every 2 months, but really indicated HIV antigen antibody testing at every visit. So that's going to be a debate. It's going to be an implementation science question for the future. I can already tell you at Ward 86 that we have patients on IM cabotegravir who are surprised that we would get HIV RNA testing this often. And we have to think in our own setting, is this going to end up being long-term feasible? So I'll end with long-acting cabotegravir PrEP is here. It's imperative to expand access. It's imperative to get equitable access. It's a very highly effective product. This idea that you could maybe 6 times a year in a surreptitious manner with stigma at home, come in and get these injectables and then go home and not have to come back for another 2 months is very exciting. We need implementation science projects. We need low-cost solutions, and we need questions regarding how to monitor whether in settings where viral load testing really can't be done every 2 months. So I'll end there and take questions as they come. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Monica. If you could, yeah, thank you for sharing your screen. And I'm going to ask Mitchell and Rachel to just go on camera. We have time for a few questions. I want to let everyone know that our final speaker, who is someone who uses Apretude, which is the brand name for cabotegravir in the United States, unfortunately has COVID. Just got COVID. He's not feeling well. He's not going to be able to join us. He's amazing. He was really fantastic. Hopefully we'll bring him back, because I think it's really important to hear from actual people using these products. And in the United States, we have had it available technically since late last year or early this year. But very few people are getting injectable PrEP at the moment. So we will definitely make plans to hear from him again. We will be talking to the person who prescribes PrEP, injectable PrEP to him. So that's exciting. But I wanted to just take a moment, and since we have a few extra minutes and we were a little pressed at the beginning of time, do we have anyone who would like to ask a question verbally? And if you want to do that, you're going to raise your hand. You go down and click on the little dots that say more at the bottom of your screen, and you can raise your hand and we will see you and I'll be able to call on you. But I have a question in the chat that I think any one of you or a bunch of you could focus on, from Catherine Myers. And she's asking, are there any plans to monitor resistance in infections acquired during the tail through a registry? From my understanding, the 2 trials, because they were so highly effective, did not transition participants to, quote, step 3 of oral Truvada or oral PrEP. And so this has not been monitored to date. Can either of you, any of you, speak to that?
This is Rachel here. Yes, I mean, as you know, and Mitchell and I and others are working with the relatively small number of implementers and researchers who are planning and are likely to start CAB implementation projects. And these, the ones that are very firmed up, are ones funded by Unitaid in Brazil and in South Africa. And then there are a number under the USAID funded Mosaic project. Again, that's largely in Eastern Southern Africa. We're also very excited about the potential of a PATH project with the ministry in Vietnam. So we're, and there are others that are all at that stages of implementation, of really planning that implementation. And so we already have a group that meets on this, and we really want to have a joined up way of thinking about drug resistance, and that's something that we're following up with our colleagues on drug resistance at WHO. And I think there are 2 issues here. You know, and I didn't have time to go into this in detail, but you know, I can take this offline. It's very uncertain whether actually using molecular testing and potentially identifying a seroconversion earlier, and then confirming that is a positive case, and then linking to treatment, how many of these very, very rare drug resistances would actually be prevented. And also the analysis of those, the drug resistance that has occurred. Not all of those drug resistant cases are fatal for starting first-line dolutegravir regimes. So we need to really have a way that we can monitor not only how seroconversions happen in these implementation sites, how many of these have drug resistance, and what is that impact on treatment, and whether in fact it will have any significant impact. So that's something we are really focusing on at the moment. And I think, you know, as Monica said, you know, the cases are very, very small, particularly in the women trials. There are two areas where seroconversions happen. One is, of course, starting in the acute phase, and that's we can be a little bit smarter about that in really scrutinizing people just for symptoms of acute infection in the very short period before starting. And if people have had a very recent high risk exposure, starting a PrEP and then transitioning to CAB to really reduce those potentials. And then of course there were a very small number of seroconversions that actually happened whilst taking CAB, but these were in 083. They weren't evident in 084. And then as people come off CAB and are in that long tail period, that at the moment doesn't seem to be a period where which induces any drug resistance. But it's because there are so few infections, it's really difficult to make any definitive recommendations at this stage, which is why we need to have a coordinated approach as CAB becomes more available through these demonstration and implementation science projects. A challenge, of course, is what's happening in the US. So you know, this is much more of a you know, real world situation. These are not closely monitored and coordinated ongoing implementation science. So be interesting to see how we can link up with that data as well.
Thank you, Rachel. So Rich Love, let's hear from you. You have your hand raised up. Please unmute your phone or your audio and go ahead and ask your question briefly, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So mine will start with a commendation to AVAC and all the team members in AVAC. I wouldn't know how my life would have been without you. My passion for HIV advocacy started when my best friend died out of HIV, and I didn't even know she had it. And so I started reading wide about it, and your website was a great resource point for me, especially when I started sexual health advocacy.
Jim, are you hearing Rich Love?
Radio.
I'm not.
Do you hear me? Hello?
Oh, there's Rich Love.
Rich Love,
Yes.
can you? Rich Love,
do you hear me? I do hear you. Do you hear me?
Mitchell, do you hear Rich Love?
I do not, unfortunately.
Oh,
Rich Love, did you hit mute original audio?
Is it okay now?
Well, it looks like others are hearing her.
We can hear her.
Okay.
Okay, others can hear. So Mitchell's having issues. Go ahead. The rest of us seems like we can hear her. So go ahead, Rich Love. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. So I was saying, mine will start with a commendation, and I send my heartfelt appreciation to AVAC and all the team members there. My passion for HIV advocacy started when my best friend died out of HIV, and I had no idea she was even infected because she was afraid perhaps to talk about it. And then I started sexual health advocacy as a radio presenter, and I took on HIV advocacy strongly. And what saved my life at a point was the resources I found on AVAC website. I kept reading about it. And the first time I read about PrEP was on your website. So got to a point I got exposed, and I just remembered I had read about the 72 hour salvage period. And that was what saved my life. I had to run to a doctor and get the PrEP, and I had to take it for 28 days, and it wasn't easy. but it was worth it. Years after years, I have tested negative. So that is a good thing. So I have to start with
Hopefully
great recommendation for you and
tell
your
us
team.
the question.
Yeah, so a great commendation. And now, even though I'm no more in Ghana, I plan to go back in Ghana. I'd like to ask how your presence is in West Africa, because I've never really heard about AVAC, apart from all the resources that I was reading online. So I'd like to know how your presence is, especially in rural Ghana. I was an admission educator and counselor, and most of our senior high schools, especially our teenage children, I think, especially in the rural areas, there are a lot of cases there and a lot of risk and exposure factors there. How are you? How is your presence in the rural Africa?
Thank you,
Great,
Richlove.
Richlove, thank you
Mitchell,
so
you want
much.
to answer that quickly?
Sure, I was gonna, can you hear me, Jim?
Yes.
I was just going to say thank you, Rich Love, for that really beautiful comment. And I'll just take a second to say AVAC really relies on partnership, and we are not in many countries, nor certainly not in deep rural areas anywhere, and much less in West Africa. We rely on partnerships. And so many of you on the line and across the world, I think the fact that we are able to partner here to translate this call for people dialing in from Ukraine is a great example of partnership in action. So if people are interested, please do engage and follow up with emails. But thank you so much. And Jim, maybe back to you.
Thank you, Mitchell, and thank you, Richlove. I'm going to now invite Carrie Carnival to go ahead and share her screen and do her presentation. And Carrie, I just want to put out there for you, a couple of questions came in for Monica that maybe you can answer while you're talking, and then we'll all convene again at the end.
Yes.
But one of the questions was, what kind of people are kind of showing up right now for Apretude? What's the client profile for people who are asking for injectable PrEP in the United States and getting it, since it's such a small amount of people at the moment? So if you could speak to that while you're discussing your doing your talk, that would be fantastic.
Oh yeah, and I can talk about the San Francisco experience if you'd like later.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank
okay,
you.
great. Go ahead, Carrie.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Everyone?
Is
Yes, we
someone
can
else?
hear you.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk with you all today. I'm really excited to talk about this very exciting time in HIV prevention and to talk about kind of what we've been doing at New York Presbyterian, Columbia, and what we've seen since the rollout. So I'm Carrie Carnevale. I'm a nurse practitioner at New York Presbyterian. I am a core faculty member of the PTC there as well. I see patients, and I also manage the grants that we have. So just really quick, let me just move my boxes around. Okay. So we've already kind of talked about the rollout in December of 2021. From our end, at Columbia, we had to put the medication through our NYP Pharmacy Review Board in February of 2022, which was pretty easy. It's just a step that we had to take. We had 3 patients lined up, early adopters that were very interested in receiving CAB-LA at our very robust sexual health clinic that we have uptown at Columbia. So this was in March 2022. So since that time, we've had a total of 12 patients present with interest. 5 have decided that TDF-FTC was a better choice for them, which I'll talk about a little bit. 2 are still pending insurance approval, which I'll talk about a little bit, and 5 started. 11 identified as MSM, and there was 1 cis woman who started. So one of the patients, 27-year-old Black male who had a HIV positive, or has an HIV positive partner who was not so great about taking his antiretrovirals. He was a longtime TDF-FTC user, and he was just waiting for CAB-LA to come out because he was very, very sick of taking pills every day. He was adherent to TDF-FTC, but again, the pill burden was a lot. He had a past medical history of depression, which we'll talk about, and a mood disorder. And he was fully insured, or is fully insured with commercial insurance. So in March of 2022, we quickly realized we needed to create some resources and a guide to how we're going to educate patients on CAB-LA. So this is a checklist that we have now in all of our charts, kind of to guide us to make sure everyone's understanding what they're getting into when they start CAB-LA. So we recommend this now for providers prior to even ordering the medication, which I'll talk about, and administering the medication as well. So the first important take-home point for patients, the dosing schedule and the importance of the window period. So we definitely had a couple people who presented hearing about CAB-LA and were very excited. And then when they found out that the 7-day window on either end of the injection was a requirement, they felt like this did not match with their lifestyle. So one person traveled a lot for business and just couldn't commit to an appointment in that way. Even if it was every 8 weeks, and even with the 2-week window, had to be flown various places in the country, and this was a deal breaker. So this has been something that once we educate people on, some people are saying that this isn't for them. I will say that one of the things that we realized quickly is one of the people we went through the insurance process beforehand, and it waited, a month to get insurance approval. And he then realized that it was the 7-day window on either end. So he decided not to go ahead. So that's why we're kind of saying doing this before you even order the medication. The second really important take-home point for patients is where the injection is. So like I said, we have a very robust sexual health clinic. We have a lot of patients who have had syphilis before and have a little bit of PTSD from a bicyclin injection. So the idea of having a gluteal injection every 8 weeks was slightly triggering for them. And that was also a deal breaker. So making sure that patients understand this before they come for their first injection. Although we understand that as being something that we would just think of, some people have come to their first injection and said, no, wait, I didn't know. So this is also an important point that we're making sure patients understand before we even order the medication. The medication tail piece, I know others have talked about this, but trying to make sure that patients understand what this means, especially if they're coming in to CAB-LA because of pill burden. We really want to make sure that they understand that if they were to stop, that most likely being on an oral regimen would be something that we would recommend. And we kind of go through a choose your own adventure with a patient and just say, okay, so if you decide that you don't want this anymore, Truvada or TDF-FTC, Descovy, like we need to talk about what that's going to look like for you. Using condoms, obviously, but if we can encourage them to then go on an oral regimen, that would be ideal. So for folks that come in to CAB-LA because they don't want to take pills at all, which have been a lot of the people, one of the things that we really want to make sure they understand is if they were to stop, this is something that they would have to kind of consider. This woman that we started, really did not want to take pills at all, had taken Truvada and Descovy before, and could not even swallow the pills. So the conversation was, if you stop, we need to talk about what that's going to look like for your sex life and what that's going to look like for you, and what that means, and just have a real conversation about what that means. So this is a graphic we came up with because we really needed a graphic that kind of laid out for patients that we walk through, okay, here are the drug levels. And for the next year, as Monica said, you have to kind of assume that you have a low level of the drug in your system. The best thing that you can do is take the TDF-FTC or the Descovy during this time to give you the added protection and comfort in knowing that you are protected still. And here's just another way that we have a blown up version of our graph. So the other point that we really want to make sure that people understand is the plan for if they experience an increase in depressive symptoms. So we have a lot of patients who have untreated mental illness and treated mental illness, kind of letting folks know that if they are to experience an increase in depressive symptoms, what the plan is. So we have social workers on staff who are wonderful, making sure that they're connected, making sure they know who to call, making sure the patients are preemptively recognizing that this might not be an increase in them feeling depressed. It could be a side effect of the drug. All of these things we want to talk through with patients, especially if they have a history. So insurance, lovely problems. So it's taking about 2 weeks, and that's being generous for insurance approval. I would say the more likely end is a month. This, we've obviously been very used to same-day starts with oral PrEP. So this is definitely a change. So patients come in, they have blood work, they come back. Logistically, trying to come up with the schedule for how somebody starts on cabotegravir is difficult when you're putting into context the insurance company. So when we do the labs, when we do the ordering, all of that for a new patient is difficult. If somebody is on TDF-FTC or TAF-FTC, it's a little easier because we can kind of rest assured that they're being protected during this time, doing routine PrEP visits, and then waiting for CAB to show up. So that's kind of where we're at with that. The biggest thing somebody asked about in the chat, we'll talk about in a second, but first I just want to talk about in the US, the pharmacy benefits versus the medical benefits. So to break it down really quick, the medical benefits are when the CAB-LA administration is bundled within the medical visit. So this is as if you were going to give chemo. It's bundled in as a cost of the visit. This is incredibly difficult to navigate in the private insurance spectrum because you basically have to go through your in-house floor stock and order it ahead of time and bill ahead of time, which a lot of our medical system, or at least our PrEP clinic, is not really set up to do. So we've done one so far. It took 6 weeks. Hopefully the next ones will move forward better, but it's a huge barrier. Pharmacy benefits are a little bit easier. That's like just if you would order it separately from the visit. So you can order it from a specialty pharmacy, it gets delivered. It's easier, it's still not great. And here's an example of how it's not great. So one of the insurance companies, and actually a couple of them have said so far, that you need to document a failure of oral PrEP before you can go on CAB-LA. So for folks who never wanted to take oral PrEP, this is a problem. So what do you do? Not to mention that, but if they were to stop CAB-LA and need to go on oral PrEP, or they need to bridge doses, they're traveling and they don't have a way of getting their injection, what does that do? If you've already said that they can't tolerate the medication, how are you then going to get it paid for? So this is a problem that we haven't come up against yet. We've basically convinced them that they would not be able to tolerate oral PrEP. But we haven't seen what we have to do if somebody discontinues CAB-LA and then go back to the drug company and say, or go back to the insurance company, sorry, and say, actually, they need to tolerate that now. So I don't have an answer for this. This is definitely something we're seeing. So this is a challenge. So some information that we need on the ground. The oral lead-in, we've done that for one patient who had allergic reactions to TDF-FTC and TAF-FTC, both had a rash. So we wanted to do an oral lead-in for CAB to make sure that they didn't have a reaction to CAB. They did not, they started CAB. But we're definitely moving away from that for most people. But we need to know more information about when CAB is actually protective in the body. So for Truvada or for TDF-FTC, we can easily say, okay, you take the pill for 5 to 7 days, or you take the loading dose of 2 pills and you're protected. We don't have this information for CAB, and that would be helpful, I think. And how long after a single injection does it take for you to be protected? Also important. And when you're bridging injections, so if you miss a day, and we just don't know the levels of CAB that are protective, which is, I think, scary for some people and scary for providers. And do we need to fall back on our old friends of TAF-FTC and TDF-FTC when we're bridging injections, and what that means? So our 27-year-old MSM received his 4th injection last week, reports to be feeling well and has no complaints with the medication thus far. Majority of people have tolerated it well. I would say one person did say they felt a ball underneath the injection site for the whole time in between injections. It's like kind of like a little nodule. So that was the biggest complaint that we've gotten. But otherwise people are feeling great and hopefully there'll be more adopters. So we do recommend a first informational visit. If somebody calls and says, I'd like CAB-LA, we try to do a televisit. If they want to come in person, that's fine too, but do the education before they, we order the meds or we move forward with a visit. So we do a televisit kind of explaining all of the items. We've had a lot of people during this televisit who had never heard of on-demand PrEP say, oh, I didn't know I could, the pill burden was an issue. Oh, I didn't know I could take it on demand. So they chose TDF-FTC. Labs at each injection visit, that's a lot. It's every 8 weeks. It's more than we usually do, but right now we're kind of pairing it with the injections and doing the full STI panel during that time. This is another graphic that our partners from Blueprint, if you guys want to check it out, there's a lot of really good resources that they've created. Here's another graphic to kind of explain to patients the schedule. And that's what I have. I would love to hear any questions. I haven't been looking at the chat, so if anyone has.
Thank
Catherine?
you, Carrie. If you would like to unshare your screen so we can all see each other. Thank you for that. And I'm going to open it up. There's been a lot of questions. I'm hoping our panelists can stick around for a while, so please let's see your beautiful faces. And if you have to drop off a little early, that's fine. We're gonna probably try to run an extra 10 or so minutes to capture some of these questions. And any one of our panelists can jump in. I'm going to ask up front, please ask your questions quickly and answer the questions quickly so we can get to as many as possible. I know a lot of these things are very complex, a lot to say, but try to be as brief as possible on both sides. I am going to start with Giannis.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Really fantastic presentations from everybody. Question to Caroline. Just interesting observation. Majority are MSM that are sort of the early adopters of CAB-LA. Given the the really great efficacy data from the trials for cisgender women, what are you guys doing in your sort of community to increase kind of the promotion of this product for cisgender women? And then I also have a question to Monica. Hi, Monica.
Hi.
And I see you not on YouTube, so it's great to see you. A question from San Francisco, given, and it's sort of related also to our context in Ukraine, given we've had over 1,300 people who inject drugs being prescribed oral PrEP as part of our overall national program. In San Francisco, and again, given the lack of, the trials did not include PWIDs for CAB-LA, what are you doing in your setting maybe about including or provision of CAB-LA to PWIDs, maybe under the context of implementation research or some other mechanism, and some of the thoughts about CAB-LA for this population, given everything we've heard around resistance? Thank you.
No, it's a great question. I mean, in terms of women, we have a specific clinic for those who are at risk or those who have HIV who are living as women. So we have been pushing it in this population. It's actually more, like you said, it's actually more effective for cisgender women than transgender women in MSM, probably because actually TDF-FTC in comparison is less effective in cisgender women, maybe because of drug levels, maybe because of adherence stuff. We never quite figured that out, but FemPrep and Voice happened for a reason. And then second, you're right that the Bangkok tenofovir study for oral PrEP for those who inject drugs was actually a very interesting study because you didn't get efficacy until much later when other things had happened, like needle exchange and other harm reduction implementation in Bangkok. So we've never been totally secure about tenofovir and people who inject drugs. So but there is no, with such high concentrations, there's no reason not to think of it for people who inject drugs. And then of course, like you said, follow patients closely. So we would push this we had quite a bit of uptick of drug use in the city of San Francisco during COVID. So we are pushing this for people who inject drugs as well.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Yeah, Yannis, to answer your question. So you guys might know, like, the timing of this came right when we got slammed with monkeypox. So our original plan was to do a lot of outreach with our family planning clinics and our school-based health clinics, which are go up a little older in age. They go up to like 21, to talk more about how this is an option and at least do education with cis women about this being an option. So hopefully when, knock on wood, if things calm down, we'll be able to start doing that a little bit more. But yes, I think as a community, we've done a bad job of engaging cis women in HIV prevention resources. So I think all of us would love to see this roll out. And the early adopter cis woman who came in, I mean, we were just so excited. And we really want to encourage and at least give some more education about what this can look like.
Thank you, Carrie. We'll go to a brief question from Michelle or comment.
Yes, this will be a brief question, and this is Ruby, who's with me here. Carolyn, thank you for your presentation. I've heard Monica and Rachel and Mitchell speak, but this is actually the first time I've heard a provider speak. And so I was wonderful to hear Rachel and Mitchell and Monica, but for me, the first time hearing a provider. I work with Rachel at WHO. My brief question is, coming from WHO, I'm really encouraged to hear what you're doing as a provider. And I would like to know, and I'm totally putting you on the spot, what you would recommend to providers in low and middle income countries, what to think about. Because in the beginning, what I'm assuming is that when there's national programs, that it will be the government paying or an implementer. So what would you recommend? And just off the top of your head. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's really difficult. It's, if we can get the cost down, obviously substantially. I think one of the things with MSM, and I'm not sure if, I know this is a difficult topic, but on-demand dosing for TDF FTC, I feel like we've it like kind of got swamped by, it was like overseen by COVID, like people don't necessarily know about it. So for the MSM community, I feel like the cost saving nature of that and the ability to use that for a broader population, I think we could do more education around that for folks who aren't so excited about taking a pill every day for a disease they don't have. I think on-demand dosing, we could do a lot more education on. I'm really excited about CAB-LA. I think we have a lot of questions, and I'm nervous about lack of adherence and the tail outside of clinical trials.
Just to say, though, to be fair, because I was just in India for 5 weeks and gave a lot of talks on long acting, and there was a lot of interest in lower middle income countries, as you say, because the stigma, the reasons for lack of adherence are actually very different in our setting and different settings, and the stigma related to where do you put your pills if you're the daughter-in-law of the family and you got HIV from your husband, but the mother-in-law would blame you anyway if you had HIV or on PrEP. Where do you hide them? I mean, it's really around so much stigma. So I think the stigma relief of long acting would be really big in this setting.
Yeah, and I think for cis women, there's a lot of opportunities, obviously.
Thank you for that comment. And before, go ahead, Mitchell.
I just think both of you are spot on. I think for me, this is probably the single most important opportunity, that we not go about just saying we're going to introduce cabotegravir for PrEP. This is a chance to reimagine prevention with the dapivirine ring. And I think, Caroline, you're totally right. We've under-discussed for populations for whom we know on-demand can work. This is our chance to reimagine and promote prevention differently. So I think the big message for me to funders and programmers and implementers and providers is, don't just see this as the newest product. Let's make everybody aware of injectable PrEP. This is a chance to say, Rachel started it this way. We have more options than we've ever had. And I don't want to see a lot of vertical CAB programs. I want to see reimagined prevention programs that use CAB and on-demand oral PrEP and the dapivirine vaginal ring for the relevant populations. That's our opportunity. And I know we get stuck on kind of individual topic areas, but to the degree we can all elevate that up, to me, that's the future. Has to be the future.
Absolutely. I think providing that buffet, and when we add new things to the buffet, we don't take old stuff off the buffet. A lot of people like oral Truvada, even though there's a lot of people who have problems with it. And a lot of people will not like injectable PrEP. I don't mean this as a question. I just want to put it out there, and then we're going to take Adam's question. But it came up in the chat, and I just want to elevate it. So when we're thinking about CAB, you know, I think one of the tricky things, and I think Carrie started to touch on it, and you all touched on it to some degree, is the clinic burden. I mean, we're now having people come to a clinic 6 times a year. That is no small thing. I'm a positive person. I've been positive since '95. I go to my doctor twice a year. That feels like a lot, and I'm positive. So I think going to a clinic 6 times a year is an issue for both the person on PrEP and the person and the people delivering it in the clinic that's already busy and already swamped. And I think, I guess we haven't heard enough, we haven't seen yet like how this is all going to play out, but I think it's going to be tricky.
Also, Jim, just to your point really quick, the burden for insurance approval is ginormous. We're very lucky. We have pharmacy liaisons doing our prior authorizations for us, but I can't imagine doing this without them. It's a lot of hours on the phone and back and forth with insurance companies.
Yeah, so if you're a smaller clinic and you have less resources, less navigators, less people to spend hours on the phone for each individual person in the United States context, it's going to be really hard. But even if things were running smoothly, we're now bringing a lot of people into the clinic on a regular basis, and those people have to show up. I mean, I think it's a big deal to like take off work and go to the doctor and sit and have the thing, you know, take it over an hour. Not everyone can do that. So there's a lot we have to really address. And again, I think the broader point is making all things available, not putting our thumb on any scale, trying to help people get what will fit their needs at that time in their life. Adam, we're going to take your question.
Thank you, everyone. Just quick question around the injection again. I know initially in 083 they had some issues with like reactions to the nanosuspension, the lipids in the egg. Are you seeing any of that or any seizure issues, again, that were an initial concern? Or how are you screening for that? Or I guess just being preventative in that aspect?
We have not, I mean, we've only had 5 patients, but we haven't seen any issues with that. Like I mentioned, the nodule that one of the patients complained about, that was under the skin.
That was the common one.
That was, yeah.
Okay.
But nothing else that we can.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
And to say, Adam, I mean, definitely, I mean, from 083 and 084, you know, there are huge numbers of people who've received CAB, and really there were very, very few who discontinued because of any injection site issue. A few more of the men, and I think the men experience more pain than women, but you know, that's to be expected. But just to go back to Jim, I think your point is absolutely critical. And I think making life easy for people for choices and flexible. And, you know, we're really trying to do this under the work that my colleague Robin Schaefer is doing on the simplified differentiated oral PrEP, you know, really beefing up knowledge about event-driven PrEP, supporting people who've started on PrEP and are happy with it, to have a much more flexible approach to stopping and starting and using self-testing and you know, getting community pickups. I mean, that's very much the way to go. And I think the same with the dapivirine vaginal ring. It's a very, very safe product. I could really envisage that being available with a self-test through a pharmacy. You know, so people and you know, could have options, and I could imagine as well, and I Caroline, I would like your opinion on this, but I think, you know, somebody who's really trained to give injections, it could be a community health worker, you know, could provide these in a community setting. We've got to just make life easy, and you know, really, and I think a lot of people have mentioned PrEP. You know, all of these, PrEP has absolutely been underutilized, and people are sort of, in many settings, you have to be almost go and beg for it, and you know, be really interrogated on why you need it, rather than just, you know, being able to go to a pharmacy, get a self-test. You know, you've had a you know, on a Friday night, you've had a night out, Saturday morning, pop in, get oral, you know, post-coital contraception, PrEP, and maybe even doxy-PrEP. We just got to make life easier for people and to for people's lives.
No, I love this. I love the community healthcare worker idea, and I love the access idea. I have a hard time seeing it in the US completely. But if, you know, if those barriers were removed, that sounds like heaven. Can we go there? It sounds great.
And jump in, Mitchell, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, it does sound like heaven, and unfortunately, none of us are living there as far as I know. But I think being aspirational is really important right now. And obviously, we have to be realistic. And what I wanted to come back, there are a bunch of great points in the chat. And I wanted to come back to this issue of cost. And I think Chris Obermeyer, now at the Global Fund, raised, it's never just the procurement cost. I mean, I think we get really focused on the price of the product. And what I was trying to show about the considerations slide is that every product actually has programmatic costs, and some are going to be higher and some are going to be lower. And I think what we need to do, and we obviously need to fight for lower costs, period. Lower cost of the product, lower cost of all the ancillary work. I also want to make sure we don't see the price and costs as a reason to be paralyzed. Yes, this product is initially way too expensive. Certainly in the US, it's already said to be way cheaper, into the hundreds of dollars per year, hopefully even lower in low and middle income countries. But as Chris says, the price and the cost of the program is still going to be high. I want to make sure that as a community, we work together to figure out what's the most cost-effective way to deliver prevention. And that means both lowering costs, but also getting more effective with our programs. And I think there are a number of things that we can do to try to reduce our costs and improve our effectiveness. And that's about HIV testing. I remember in the earliest days of oral PrEP planning 15 years ago, before we had the data from the oral PrEP studies, people talked about these really expensive testing costs. Well, in fact, testing is a cost that health systems are bearing all the time. So let's make sure we are not kind of putting a yoke around the product of saying, wow, that's too expensive. If we can prevent infections, we've got to figure out how to drive the cost lower and be more effective. And so I'm not at all justifying higher costs. What I'm trying to say is we need to figure out how to break this logjam in real time. And that means getting much smarter and much more efficient with our programs. And some of the demand creation, for example, some of the HIV testing, those are costs that can be absorbed by our programs writ large. And as Rachel just said, this got lost in the AIDS 2022 shuffle. Less than $1 self-test, hugely important. Can you use self-test with injectable PrEP? Not yet clear, but let's begin to think about these things and think about how do we get, I'd like to see us of comparing cost-effective programs with each other, not just procurement cost of commodities, because I think it's a false economy because if we got prices lower, we're going to procure a lot of cheap product, and it may sit in warehouses because we don't have the wherewithal to deliver them. So I think we really need to think about the cost to deliver a prevented infection, as opposed to just the cost of a ring or the cost of a tablet or the cost of an injection. And that's going to take a lot of effort by all of us.
Those are such great points, Mitchell. And I'll point out what's happening in the US. There is some effort to create a national PrEP program. Our president has said he wants to commit $10 billion over 10 years to help implement PrEP. But it's underpinned. One of the key things is that we'll be able to utilize generic Truvada and save a lot of money as opposed to name brand drugs, and then hopefully be able to shovel that money back into programming that is tailored and based around health equity, so folks can get access. But you're right. It's definitely all about programming.
And
I see
actually,
that
Jim,
we're like way over.
Can I
I'm
pick
gonna
up?
start wrapping us up, and I'm gonna ask each of our remaining speakers to think right now of the one thing you want people to take away. One thing you want people to take away, not two things. That's one thing. And tell us that in as succinct a way as you can. And I'm gonna go alphabetically by last name. So we're gonna start with Rachel Bagley.
Okay, my takeaway is none of this is going to work without communities being involved. So I'm looking at AVAC, I'm looking at the networks, I'm looking at everybody to really get knowledge and information about the choices that we have to communities, so that they're really empowered to know what's going to suit them.
Thank you so much. And we'll move on to Carrie.
I think that we don't have PrEP choice in the US as long as insurance companies make decisions about what PrEP people can get. So whether it's injectable PrEP, whether it's generic, whether it's whatever it is, insurance companies are deciding what people will get, deciding their choice.
And for all of us who are so committed to choice, that is such a huge barrier. It is really quite insane for someone who really hates pills, doesn't want to take a pill, says that up front, to then be forced to fail taking pills before they're provided the injection. That is really just criminal, as is much of our healthcare system in this country. So we have a lot of work to do. That's bigger than PrEP, quite frankly. Mitchell, go ahead.
Hard to follow. It's the program, not the product. And that program has to be community-led. It has to be focused on the user, not on the system, which I know is a huge ask, but follow the person, not the program, and not the health system. Let that be the driver, and go way the hell faster. We've got to be speeding down this prevention highway responsibly, for sure, but we have got to pick up the pace, because I am tired of going to every bloody AIDS conference for the last 7 years and seeing 1.5 million people newly infected every year. That bar just stays flat, and so we've got to lead with community, go with speed, lead with equity, and get shit done way faster, and focus on the programs, not the product.
There we go. That'll be how we end it. Get shit done way faster. We all spend so much time on implementation studies and this study and that study, and sometimes it's just about start delivering and tweak along the way, right? I want to thank everyone today for joining us through some of our technical issues. I definitely think the technical issues were worth it to have such a large contingent of our Ukrainian friends and colleagues on the call. So thank you all from Ukraine for being here, and thank you to everyone from all 40 countries who registered and joined us today. It's really been a great conversation. We do want to hear from, it was really great to hear from a prescriber, Carrie, and we really want to hear from people using the drug and what it's like for them. And again, we really wanted to have this young guy on this call. He's amazing. We're going to refigure that out. He will get through COVID, and we will have another webinar with aptitude and early adopters, and so stay tuned for that. I also want you to pay attention to your email. We have a number of great things coming up. So I told you we have a Dapivirine ring webinar in September. In October, we're going to be talking about doxy-PEP. That's the use of doxycycline for PEP, STI PEP. And then we're going to have a great conversation about PEP, HIV PEP in November. So lots happening on the choice agenda. I hope you'll join us on our listserv and at future webinars. And with that, I am going to now at my time, 9:53, 23 minutes after we were planning to stop, we're going to go ahead and call the webinar. I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your good work, and we'll see you all very soon. Take good care.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jim.